Simmons here. As promised, I am coming to you live tonight for about an hour. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Instagram, come on in. If I'm looking away from camera, I'm also checking the peeps out on Facebook. I think we're probably going to be live YouTube. I'm not sure about Twitter tonight, but we'll make sure we share it to all the platforms. So you're going to share this. If anybody's been asking you, who the heck is this chick? Where did she come from? When did she get here? Well, if you're just tuning in for the first time, my name is Jade Simmons, and I am your one and only truly serious independent candidate for President of the United States. Yes, I did say that. I did not slip up. I meant what I said. I am running for president of this here United States. Why? Because there is no time like the present to offer a new lane of leadership for our great nation. Our great nation is in the midst of great distress. I would not be doing this if it were a game, if it were for political or professional or personal gain. I'll tell you, there are lots of other things I could have been doing in 2020, just like many of you. But I'm doing this because I feel it's the right thing to do. I'll spend the next 45 minutes now to about an hour answering many of your questions. I already have about 100 questions that you've already sent in. I'm going to work to go through those. Some of these are from I Heart Miko. I did her podcast a couple of weeks ago, and we only got through about, 15 of 46 questions that her incredible viewers and listeners had sent in. And I promised her that over the next few weeks, I would do my best to get through all of those questions. Why do I take time to do this? Well, because I think it's a very rare thing to have direct access to the people vying to lead you. I think when we're interacting with each other, it doesn't really cross our minds. We don't really grasp it that we could be talking to someone who is in a position very soon to affect things in our everyday lives, to affect the atmosphere, the climate of the nation. And I think it's only fair to give everyday Americans the opportunity to go back and forth with the people who will be leading them. Because when our politicians get into power, it's very hard to get their ear. And so one of our pledges as a part of Operation Restoration, that is the movement powering my campaign. Want to learn more about it? Do your due diligence. Before you even start asking me questions, do your due diligence. Many of you are asking questions and the information is readily available. But that's what tonight is for as well. I will prioritize questions I have not been asked in the last 9 months, but I will also hit some of the more common ones, the big elephants that are always in the room, no matter how many times I answer the question. So again, OperationRestoration2020.com is where you guys can go to find out a lot about the different platform statements we've released so far. We're still releasing policy, still releasing plans, still releasing strategy. Why? Because we don't take you for granted. We don't expect you to just vote for me because I'm a woman, to just vote for me because I'm Black, to just vote for me because I'm Christian, to just vote for me because I'm not like the other main candidates that you're hearing about. We expect you to do your homework. I would be honored to be the president of the most informed nation in the world. Definitely the most informed nation that we've ever been. So my big challenge to you all in these final 30 days, can you believe it? We're 30 days out. My final challenge to you is to spend the next 30 days doing some real serious soul searching. I was in a back and forth with somebody on Facebook. Yes, I do take time about twice a week. I spend about an hour on social media and I answer your questions, answer some of your grievances, and even answer some of the haters. And I was going back and forth with someone who was surprisingly nasty. Listen, as you work to get rid of the hate that you despise, do not start sounding like the hate that you despise. It's a real sad state of affairs when normally kind, reasonable Americans start talking like madmen, start treating other people, trying to do their best, treating them just with disrespect and indignity. Watch yourselves in this season that you don't start looking like the very thing you say you're trying to vote out of office, that you don't look like the very thing you say you're trying to keep out of office. So just be careful that you don't lose your character in this season, because I promise you the powers that be will go on being who they are. Make sure that you stay intact as well. I digress. As I was responding to this person, she had a sincere fear, and I'm going to start with that fear tonight as we get started. I'm going to try to keep up with your questions as they come in, but do know that I'm also answering about 100 different questions that were sent in last Tuesday as we went live with the debates as well. And I'll go until about 8 p.m. This won't be the last time. I'll come back as often as possible to do just this, so that in the next 30 days, you can spend your time doing your due diligence. This person I was going back and forth with on Facebook said, Jade, this is not about vision. This is just about getting this awful man out of office. And you know what I've been thinking, guys? It's a luxury and a privilege when our concern gets to be simply getting someone out of office because they grate on our nerves, because we see them as the worst thing ever, because we see them as a degradation of the office of president. I understand a lot of people, a lot of Americans feel that way. A lot of Americans actually like the president as well. But what I said to this person is I said, something we should consider, that this country wasn't working well for many people before COVID-19, for many people before President Trump. And it will still not work well for them, even if Vice President Joe Biden gets in office. That we now must also think of the people who don't have the luxury of simply being annoyed or scared of the current resident of the White House, but that they need change and paradigm shifts that will not happen if politics as usual, red or blue, take office in this season. So we are standing firm for the 60% of this country, 60% of Americans who no longer believe that they see themselves in the two-party system. We are standing firm for 100 million Americans who haven't even seen fit to vote because they haven't seen anything worth voting for. We are proud that people in that 100 million who used to be in that 100 million are now registering to vote so that they can vote for Operation Restoration for my candidacy. That people in that group who said I was going to sit out this year because I was so sickened by the state of things and by the options being stuffed down my throat, that they are now standing up and saying they are going to the polls this year. We're proud of that. Thank you for sending your pictures in of your ballots. It's awesome to see your checks by my name. It's awesome to see you writing us in. I'm going to make a video after this about how you can vote for us, what the write-in process looks like, what it means, and how valid it truly is. But let's jump in. I'll start with the elephant always in the room. This is water, by the way. I'm going to tilt that so you can. It's important to me that you see that's water. It's a red cup, but I promise this is water. I am going to start with the elephant in the room, which is, aren't you worried? Aren't you afraid? Aren't you naive? Aren't you stupid to not understand that the only thing you're going to do is split the vote? I've gotten that question in every way, shape, or form. It still amazes me that people think they are the only person to have ever asked me that question, and that I am naive enough not to know that that question and concern exists. I understand the concern. Let me tell you right away, I'm a person who believes in research and believes in numbers. And if you look at 2016, the split vote concept was not the reason that Mrs. Clinton lost the election. It was not the reason. Jill Stein, people call her a spoiler. In truth, she wasn't. Here's the thing. I can't steal any votes that belong to other candidates. If the other candidates are doing their job, if the other candidates are passionately and powerfully representing the people they claim to serve, their votes can't be stolen from them. For someone to ask me to step aside so that people don't have a chance to vote for the candidate they believe in, so that they can be forced to vote for the candidate that you believe in, is an actual attack on our democracy as we know it. A democracy can only flourish with an abundance of options. We went all the way to Europe years ago to teach them how to have fair elections. You know what we told them? We told them you must have multiple options on the ballot. And then we came back and in hypocritical fashion did exactly the opposite. And for years we have stifled our American people to only two choices, forcing them to believe that these are their only two options, when in every election there are multiple candidates who run. Our media has been complicit. If I sound passionate, it's because for 9 months, I have faced an incredible media shutout, a shameless media shutout by mainstream media, by Black media, by political media who has known I am here. So when you come huffing and puffing on my timeline and say to me, where have you been? If you were serious, you would have shown yourself earlier. Instead of casting your suspicion on Americans who are sacrificing everything, dropping everything to lean into this vast leadership void that we have, I dare you to cast your suspicion to the two political parties who have signed a memorandum agreement that says they will not allow a third party or an independent to even step foot on the debate stage. Why? Because Ross Perot scared them. He shook them. A few years back when he ran, he was polling at less than 5% before he stepped foot on the debate stage. When he got off of that stage, he was polling at 17%, and Republicans and Democrats freaked out. You know that saying, we would rather kind of deal with the devil that we know than the devil that we don't? Well, independent candidates are the devil's advocate for the people. And Republicans and Democrats know that if they allow a compelling third voice into the action, you're going to vote for it. Because that third voice will almost always sound more like you than our two parties have become. Now, second question, if you didn't catch that, I don't believe in the split vote theory. What I do believe is it is used, it is trotted out every 4 years to continue to scare you into cowering behind party lines. Jill Stein benefited from 6 million new voters who entered the voting landscape in 2016, already deciding they were not going to vote red or blue. She did not steal those votes. They saw her as a viable candidate other than the red or the blue candidate. Right? So the people who voted for Jill were never going to vote for Hill and never going to vote for Donald. That's just how it was. She did not steal the vote. It is not my job as an independent candidate to be less compelling than your favorite guy. It is not my job as an independent candidate to be less compelling than your favorite candidate. It is your favorite candidate's job to do the hard work of continually all the way to the finish line earning the vote of hardworking Americans who deserve for us to be up at night, wondering if our policies and our principles and our proposals and our plans serve you. It should bother us that you feel like you're voting for the lesser of two evils. That should keep us up at night. It keeps me awake, and it makes us want to have power, people-powered policy just for you. Okay, I'm going to go to my 100 questions. That's the main elephant that comes at me. Don't think that I don't care about the wrong person ending up in office, but I also care about the wrong vision because I believe it is just as dangerous. I also know Americans are more resilient than we know, that no matter who wins the election, like every other election, we're going to wake up, get dressed as we always did, and figure this thing out. That's who we are as a nation. That's what makes us America. That's what actually makes us great. Every 4 years, we survive every president we've always had. If Trump wins again, we will survive him. If Biden wins, we will survive him. If I win, we will survive me. What does that mean? We will always have to survive a president because they are only human. They are not infallible. They are not the idols we try to make them. What we want to do is elect a human who cares enough about us to put us in front of politics, in front of partisanship, in front of profit, and in front of personal agenda. All right, question I got coming at me. How do you think being a Black woman as president can positively affect change for both women and minorities in office? What does that look like? So it's funny, only in the last few interviews have people been asking more about what's it like to run as a Black woman. What do I think about being the first Black woman that could potentially win the White House? The funny thing is that's been the last thing on my mind. The first thing on my mind is, man, I would love to be the first servant leader of the nation. I would love to be the first independent. Roosevelt came very close as an independent years and years and years ago, of course. I'd love to be, though, the first independent in the modern age that Americans wouldn't have to wonder whose side their president was on. They wouldn't have to wonder if there'd be backlash in their daily lives because red and blue were fighting and not getting along. I think it'd be powerful. One of the major lifts that we're going to have happen as a nation is we're going to have to restore credibility in our government on both sides. On both sides, we're going to have to restore credibility in our government leaders. We're going to have to restore credibility in our economy and in our institutions. How many of you never thought much about the CDC before now, and now you don't know if you can trust them? How many of you never thought much about the FBI or the CEA, but now you don't know if you can trust them? And it's because we have politicized everything that has come our way. We should have kept politics out of COVID-19. We should have kept politics out of dealing with the George Floyd tragedy. We should have kept politics out of it all. And instead we politicized these things and we caused Americans to live out two very different realities during COVID-19 that I believe has cost us a safe reopening, has pushed back the timeline for being able to maintain the spread. So as a Black woman, one thing that I think is uniquely powerful about that is if you look at the history of Black women in our nation, she has always been a critical, crucial feature and figure in our history. Black women have been uniquely important since the beginning of time for our nation. You look back at the horror and tragedy of birthing camps where Black women were made to birth babies only to be slaves and build the economy of this nation. We did that. Black women then nursed and nurtured these, not only the slave children that we had to raise, but we also literally nursed and nurtured the babies of our masters and our owners to full maturity, only for them to turn around and own slaves themselves. Yet we built so much of this nation on our backs as Black women, as our families were destroyed during slavery, torn apart. We were there, we were crucial. We were also there in every important political movement. If you look at women's suffrage, which actually, this may pain some of you to hear, is linked to the white supremacy movement of the day. Stanton actually, one of her arguments to her fellow white men was that if you allow us as women to vote, it will help us to continue to outnumber the number of minorities in our nation. That's a hard fact because we celebrate her in terms of women's suffrage, but she was a complicated figure and there is proof of her own racism. Yet Black women stood with her and other white women to obtain the right to vote, which they actually didn't obtain when white women got that. But we were there standing in the background. Black women were. Black women were also at the civil rights movement. You don't hear about us as much as you hear about a Malcolm or a Martin, but we were there standing in the background. And if you go to any major corporation and company today, I can count my mother amongst this number of Black women who have been crucial to the infrastructure of our American institutions. I can't tell you how many of my mother's bosses have said, we don't know what we would do without this woman. So I am very proudly running as a Black woman, but my claim to fame, I hope, would be as the nation's true first servant leader and independent who worked to have the most solutions available to as many Americans possible in spite, regardless of their race, their gender, their religion, their creed, their ethnicity. That's what I will be my legacy. All right, now I'm gonna do popcorn and go fast because I have a lot to get through. Looking now. What will you do to defend medical freedom? I get that one a lot on Facebook by two people in particular, and I rarely have the time to answer it there. I'll answer it now. I think medical freedoms are important. In our own household, we practice a certain level of medical freedom where it comes to vaccinations. We space our vaccinations out for our kids. That's something that's important. I personally believe that more research should be done in the long-term effects of vaccinations. I have a concern about the current vaccination being offered or potentially offered for COVID-19, since the normal time frame is closer to two years for a viable vaccine. I am concerned that we have rushed this one to market. And what I want to make sure, when I say people over profit, I want to make sure that we're not doing things in order to boost the stock market that could cost us American lives. I want to make sure that we're not doing things that are premature to look like we're on a quicker recovery time frame than we are, and end up sacrificing American lives. It's the same reason that I believe we should have stayed shut down longer. Because I think we cost ourselves American lives because we didn't reopen as powerfully and as safely and with as much regulation as we should have. So I do think medical freedoms should be defended. I do not feel like people should be forced to have the vaccine. What I do think should have been mandatory was testing. And I think it should have been made free and more fluidly and more quickly at the beginning of COVID-19. You look at South Korea, who never technically had a shutdown. And what they did was they tested everybody and their grandmother. That way they knew, since COVID-19, 80% of people infected with the virus never have symptoms, which means that it's a lot of people running around thinking they're perfectly fine, technically infecting everybody they're coming into contact with. And you know, as well as I know, people aren't following the restrictions. I still can't figure out why we think it's okay to take our mask off once we're in a restaurant, as if COVID-19 is like, it'll be polite and let you eat your food. We're pretending that we're still in the world we used to live in, instead of powerfully upgrading to be able to live safely in the world that we're in right now. So I do believe medical freedoms have to be protected. And I think people need the right to decide whether or not they partake of this vaccine. I'm concerned that Russia as well rushed their vaccine to market because they wanted simply to be the first. And I think we now have to watch, hopefully, what won't be the fallout from the vaccinations they've given there. What plans do I have for healthcare? You can see a bit of those plans on OperationRestoration2020.com, but let me give you my fast and furious version. I believe we've got to tackle it from 4 ways. Number 1, you pull down Medicare to the age of 55, not 60, 55. Why? Because then you have younger, healthier people buying in to Medicare, which means the government's not footing all of that bill just yet. It's also creating more competition with existing insurance companies. Number 2, you have to work with states to expand Medicare. Right now, the way that we calculate Medicare, it's not accurate. So what's happening is, I believe we need to expand it to cover people up to 133% above the poverty line. So what's happening is we're not looking at the real cost of living for many impoverished people in this nation. So we have to, expand Medicare. So that we're reaching more people. That's something we have to work with the states to do. Where was I just recently? Ohio was one of the states where this was something that they were talking about very seriously in their last legislative session, is expanding Medicaid. That will do a lot. Thirdly, you've got to fix ACA. I know some of you are like, ACA is the best thing that's ever happened. I can hear that on a Monday, and then on a Tuesday, I meet somebody in Southern Illinois who say, ACA is the worst thing that ever happened to me. I've met people on both sides, which means there's a problem. That's all. But if you throw ACA all the way out completely, as many Republicans would like to do, if you repeal that, and by the way, they keep saying replace, but the Republicans have not also come up with anything to replace. So if you just repeal it and throw it out, you're going to put 28 million people instantly off of healthcare. And remember, what we're trying to do is get more people covered. So if you want to do that quickly, you've got to do it in multiple ways. You cannot put all your eggs in one basket. One basket we love to talk about is universal health care. I think COVID-19 showed us that we need to be looking at universal health care more seriously. How do you do that and not create socialism? Well, when you think about socialism, that word scares us because it almost is always synonymous with a lower standard of care. Longer hospital wait, less control, more government interference. I believe we can move towards more universal healthcare without having to undergo those negatives. The way you do that is you roll it out in phases. We must test things to make sure they work for us. I know all the nations who have universal healthcare. We are not those nations. We, in many cases, are much larger. So we've got to make sure that what we're doing, my biggest concern as we begin to test universal healthcare, and how do I say test that? You started in the places where you have the biggest insurance monopolies, where you have the largest rates of poverty, where the insurance companies right now are not forced to play fair. And so when you start in those areas, you instantly increase competition and create a fear that if they don't serve their customers powerfully, they could be completely out in that area. And so what you do is you make sure that as you build in universal health care, you don't build in inequity in care. I know a lot of people debate whether, whether or not that's the case, but I do have friends who live in some of these incredible nations that have universal health care, and some of them will admit, they'll say, Jade, we have universal health care, but I still pay for mine, because they've seen a difference in the quality of care. What I want to make sure is, since we know poor people, African Americans, Hispanic Americans especially, are already disproportionately underserved in our healthcare system, I don't want to make it so the free care becomes the bad care that goes to the people who need it most. And so what we have to make sure is we build in equity in healthcare as we look to expand it and make it more accessible. That's 4 different ways that you could do it. You do that right away, you get more people covered quickly. If you decide to be all or nothing, what happens is somebody in stage 3 cancer goes to stage 4, while red and blue punt back and forth the healthcare volleyball that makes for good political fodder every 4 years. So if we're going to be about solutions now, we're going to have to compromise. I'm going to have to look at ways to serve more people more quickly. All right, let's see. Do you have anyone in mind for Attorney General? That person will set the tone for how minorities are treated by law enforcement. That's a good question. Everybody has mostly been concerned about my pick for Supreme Court justices, and I do have people in mind for that. But I would actually like to tell you somebody who I am looking at for Attorney General. Would you like to hear that? Nobody's talking about Attorney General. Attorney General is important because if you watch the Breonna Taylor case play out, which now we have very disturbing news coming out with the recordings that have been released, we don't know what the prosecutor actually recommended to the grand jury. If you don't know the difference between a grand jury trial and a regular jury trial, in a grand jury, the prosecution drives the case. They actually go to the jury and are able to make recommendations on how the jury, what charges they should consider. So you'll hear the prosecutor there say, hey, they didn't come back with, murder charges. They only came back with these charges. We saw the wanton endangerment charges. Well, the truth is those charges are recommended by the prosecutor. Just a little side education there. I said I wanted you to be the most informed nation in the land. Now, the grand jury could have then on their own said, you know what, we don't care what he says, we're going to go for a murder or name the charge. But the truth is, in most cases, a grand jury, they're regular people like you and me. They're going to take kind of the recommendation that's coming at them from the lawyer, who's the more learned person in the room. And so that jury got a little bit upset that the prosecutor was kind of laying all the blame and accountability on them when they felt like they still hadn't gotten much of the information they needed. So those recordings were disturbing. Before you jump to your own conclusions about that case, I dare you to actually read the transcripts. I dare you to actually listen to the recordings because what's actually been transpiring is very different than the 2 narratives you're going to get, depending on the news channels that you watch. So Attorney General, why do I mention them? An Attorney General in a Simmons administration, you better believe, will be a watchdog for the infringement of civil rights. And I think especially the eyes of the Attorney General needs to be on states that don't have hate crime laws on the books, like in the case of Ahmaud Arbery. An Attorney General needs to be sitting back, watching these cases, and really deciding whether or not we need to intervene on a federal level. I do believe Breonna Taylor's case should have been intervened by our Attorney General. Unfortunately, our Attorney General, Barr, had already said that he felt like Black Lives Matter was an insurgency group. So he kind of let it be known he was not going to interfere in that case. I think there's a lot more investigation to be had. I would like to look at somebody like an Attorney Marilyn Mosey. She is the Attorney General, or I should say, sorry, in Baltimore. She's the person who oversaw the case with Freddie Gray. It's one of the only cases where you saw police prosecuted. Now, that lady is paying dearly with her career and her reputation because she dared to hold police accountable. And what does that mean? Does it mean, Jade, are you anti-police? Nope. What I simply believe is that when it comes to these cases, our badges are put aside, our race is put aside, our neighborhoods are put aside, and the facts must be looked at as the facts. And in that case, Marilyn Mosby did something very daring, and she dared to charge police because she simply feels that American families are equal to policemen. They're equal to police force. They're equal to policemen's families. So they deserve the same level of justice. What we do know, which is a sad fact in our country, is there is a bit of a network. Many call it a good old boys network. There's a network that exists between often the prosecutor's office and law enforcement. That kind of partnership and friendship does not serve American citizens powerfully when they are going to court against law enforcement. So I like somebody like her because it shows that even though she knew they were going to come for her, and they have come for her from every side, tried to really poke holes in her case. She's paid heavily. And what I want to see in our administration are people who are willing to pay heavy in popularity in order to do what they feel is the right thing. I know what that feels like. It's not always going to be popular to do what is right, to press for what is righteous, to press for justice. You're not always going to be praised for that. And what we want is an administration full of people who aren't looking for praise. And so when you look at the prosecutor in the Breonna Taylor case, some would say he's a rising star in the Republican Party. We have to be very mindful that people aren't using these very critical moments as stepping stones in their career, which leads me to another question. People want to know if this is something, they didn't ask it as a question, it was an accusation, that maybe I am doing this for personal gain and to help my career and to profit. Let me tell you, if just straight up advice here, if you are looking to boost your career, your popularity, to grow your friends list, if you're looking to be invited to more places, if you want to get more job opportunity, if you want people to believe in your intentions and your heart, don't run for president. Don't do it. Because this is the last thing you want to do if you're looking for those things. If, though, you feel that you can look in your background and you can look in your skill set and feel that you have something to offer to the texture, to the atmosphere, to the climate of the moment we're in, whether or not it looks like on paper, you look like the other people applying for the job. If you're not doing it to be popular and you don't mind risking a lot of your friendships and relationships, then go ahead and lean into something like this. So many of you know I made my career early on as a concert pianist. The little bit of media coverage we do get likes to just stop there and tell you that I play the piano. That's the beginning of my career. I have been blessed to have played in some incredible halls, including the White House, including the Supreme Court, Symphony Hall in Chicago, Meyerson Hall nearby in Dallas. I've played in some incredible places. I've played with some incredible orchestras, and I've played some important recitals. As my career evolved, I began speaking in my concert experiences. That changed the trajectory of my career. Started adding inspiration, information, lecture recitals, career seminars as I was learning how to build a career as a freelance artist, which is where I started, where paychecks didn't come unless I was playing, unless I was invited to play someone. As I learned the ropes of that, I began to teach that back to other artists. Many artists have read my book from a long time ago called Emerge Already, which was to teach artists how to actually emerge, something I'm very proud of. Let me tell you, there's no way you're going to make me ashamed of my background as a musician. It's a God-given gift, and the piano has opened many doors for me and got me into many unexpected rooms. I won't apologize for being a musician. It's funny, when Bill Clinton pulled out his saxophone, we thought that was cool, but media and others have tried to ridicule me because I play the piano. I won't stand for it. To be a concert pianist, you're practicing 10 to 12 hours a day. If you want to talk about discipline and focus, I know what that takes. All right. I think it's Malcolm Gladwell, right, said that you have to have 10,000 hours. I think it's a lot more than that in order to be considered an expert. I've got my 10,000 hours in. You're talking about an era we're in now that needs creativity like never before, collaboration like never before. We are a nation out of tune, out of sync, out of rhythm, out of step, you name it. As a musician, as an artist, I know what it takes to orchestrate, come on with the metaphor here, to orchestrate us into a new season, right? To figure out how to work with people from different sections of the orchestra to make this thing sound right. I know what it's like to be in dissonance. That's what we are right now. Cognitive dissonance, emotional dissonance, spiritual dissonance. We're divided amongst ourselves. Who better than an artist to creatively find solutions that no other politicians are thinking about because it's not profitable for them? They will not be elected if they dare talk about things that resonate with people on the other side of the aisle. So you need a musician now who's used to working with people, working together, thinking creatively and artistically. Luckily enough, though, for those of you concerned about my leadership experience, the piano, music was only the beginning. My degrees are in music performance. I went to Northwestern University. I also followed that with a master's degree here in Houston at Rice University. And then when I got out, I decided I did not want to be a starving artist. I went from being a freelance artist to actually figuring out how to become an enterprise. I am proudly one of the most sought after international speakers in the country, was ranked one of the top for 2019 and 2020. When 2020 had just gotten started. Why am I bragging about that? Because your president has 3 jobs. They must be head of state. That means they must communicate more than effectively. But we now need a stellar communicator at the top of our nation, leading discussions now, not only with states. Imagine if our communication had been effective from the federal level where COVID-19 response is concerned. Yes, this is a nation that proudly gives authority to its states, but we threw our states out there in the middle of COVID-19 with no real national blueprint. We had no idea what each of our states had in their storehouses. One of the things that we propose is pandemic proofing our nation. Because we have fumbled the ball where COVID-19 is concerned, we must now engage in ongoing emergency preparation. We don't get to just wait on the next pandemic, mind you, which is what we're doing right now. We're so busy scrambling now with 205,000 deaths on our roster. We haven't even thought about the next wave, the next pandemic. You better believe our international enemies have watched our fault lines be exposed during COVID-19. If I were our enemy, I would say put biological warfare at the top of the list for America, because they will make it a political issue and kill themselves in the process. So you better have an effective communicator now that can not only help create the blueprint, listen to the wise counsel that they have, but craft a plan that states can then customize. You know, when we reopened our schools, I have teachers who tell me this. Jade, they said, we did not receive a plan for how to reopen. We were told as teachers to figure it out, that we had enough time since spring to figure it out. Do you know, we talked about withholding funding from schools that didn't want to reopen? What we should have done was give funding to the schools that wanted to stay closed so that they could use the funding to do distance learning more powerfully. What we did at the beginning of COVID-19 was not homeschool. Ask any serious homeschooling parent, they will tell you that was crisis schooling. They will say, take a deep breath, take a step back. Let us help you and show you what homeschooling should be and can be. That funding should have gone to also help parents who needed to stay home now in order for their kids to be homeschooled, to help parents who English is a second language be able to keep their kids home with tutoring. For schools that wanted to reopen, that funding needed to go to help them execute a plan that should have been given to them from a national level to be customized on the state and the local level. We left them out. And now we saw schools reopen happenstance, right? And then had to close down right away. That's a disservice. That's a disservice. So I believe that we now must engage in ongoing emergency preparation. Pandemic proofing is what I call it. I also think that's exciting because it creates new jobs in the area of testing and tracing. Imagine now across the nation building storehouses in strategic locations, having a national inventory so that we know, I, the president, would know Florida has this many ventilators at any given moment. New York has this much PPE at any given moment. We should have known those things. The states themselves didn't even know. We have to get our act together on a national level so that states can be able to lead themselves more powerfully. More questions. Oh. Kanye West is running for president, but it turns out he can't be elected in many states. Are there any state citizens can't vote for you in? Yes, I wish I pulled up my states map. But if you go to operationrestoration2020.com, if you go to Facebook, if you scroll down on Instagram, you'll see we released a state map where you can see all the places you can vote for me, and it's the majority of states. It is not all of the states. For instance, you cannot right now vote for me in Nevada or South Dakota. Those are states that we had to sacrifice. What I mean by that is at the height of COVID, Nevada was still requiring 10,000 signatures, maybe it's 9,000 signatures to be on the ballot. We didn't want to risk sending a team at the numbers we'd have to have a team on the ground in the middle of COVID-19, endangering not only our team, but Nevada citizens in the middle of COVID-19. Nevada does not allow write-in. So there are 8 states that do not allow write-in. In those states, we had to do the hard work of gathering signatures. We chose the states that had the least amount of signatures. It meant less time on the ground, less opportunity for contact. The problem with the signature requirement, which states should have done away with in the middle of COVID-19, because they were literally asking us to violate their own COVID-19 restrictions by being out in public amongst people. We could not have public gatherings because COVID-19 didn't allow for that. Where do you get signatures? At public gatherings. So a lot was working against us on that. So we had to take a secondary route, which was to run as a registered write-in. So every state that allowed write-in status, we filed paperwork there to make sure that no matter what, we were covered. So check out that state map. There are 2 states right now you'll actually see our name on the ballot. Louisiana, Oklahoma are 2 of them. There are others that we are fighting for, that we are challenging. We have faced tremendous candidate suppression, which we believe is voter suppression. You would not believe the stuff going on behind the scenes to keep other options unavailable to you. Indiana is one of the states that we are fighting and challenging. Indiana received our paperwork and allowed it to sit in the mailroom until the deadline passed, and then dared to deny us our place on the ballot in Indiana as a write-in, actually. And we even have proof that our paperwork was there. We have photo proof, GPS evidence, UPS tracking, and they were still trying to deny it. So these are places that we will challenge legally. Why would we do that? Because it's not right. I'm an American citizen, and I meet the requirements for running for president. I have the right to run, and you have the right to be able to vote for me. So in many states, we're still fighting, but you'll see if you look at that map, everything that's dark purple, you can pretty much already vote for us now. Wherever there is early voting, we prioritize your state. We filed there early so that we'd be in place for early voting. So check us out and see where we are and write us in. When you write me in, you write in Jade Simmons. You can also write in my vice presidential running mate, Claudelia Rose. We'll make sure we have those names spelled well for you on all of our sites. But even if you just write my name in, it will count for both of us. When you write a name in, it is the same as it being on the ballot if that candidate has done their homework and has actually registered as a write-in. If you go write in your grandma because she's awesome, I'm sure she's awesome, but the vote will not count because grandma didn't register, didn't find electors for that state, didn't file her paperwork in that state, and so your vote won't count for her. If you write me in Nevada, it will not count because Nevada does not allow write-in candidates. So we believe in giving you big, bold belief. We do not believe in giving you false hope. So where we know we are not going to be on the ballot or available, we have been open and honest about that. Where we're challenging, we let you know. So that up until November 3rd, if you're patient, you wait with us. And up until then, we'll let you know if the status doesn't change. If the status doesn't change, and in those purple states, you can go ahead and write us in right now. Kanye West is a whole other story. We are not the same. If anybody's wondering or thought I got here like he did. He jumped in 4th of July. I've been here since January, did not announce until February until my FEC paperwork was filed. And I have been proposing policy. We have even gotten calls from that camp wanting to know more about our policy. See, we're willing to do the work. Other candidates aren't willing to do the work, but they want to ride the wave of saying they're running for president. Other questions, are you being paid by Trump or the Russians? I am not being paid by Trump or the Russians. Am I being paid by Biden? No, I am not being paid by Biden. I keep joking. I keep checking my bank account to see if that's changed, but as far as I can tell, we are not being financed by anybody other than you and myself. I have put an incredible investment into this campaign because it is important, and I believe that leaders should have skin in the game. So this is an investment that I don't take for granted, and that I do not regret no matter the outcome. But what we're proud of is that Americans will be able to rest easy, knowing that no major corporations have given us donations. I do a lot of my work with corporations, could easily ask some corporations to lean in here, could promise them some things. Matter of fact, some of our policies do well for corporations. We want to incentivize corporations to come back stateside to provide new manufacturing jobs. We should never have to go to China and Mexico to buy PPE, to be able to save our own people. We have to go abroad. Why? Because many of our American companies have their manufacturing centers abroad, mostly in Asian countries. That's a whole other discussion. So I could go to corporations. I could kind of wink and tell them, hey, I'm your girl. We have decided not to do that. So you don't have to lose sleep wondering if every decision I make is because of something I owe a corporation. So we have taken a very hard route on purpose. It's much more difficult, 100 times more difficult, but it will be 100 times more rewarding. Let's see. Am I worried about taking votes from Biden-Harris? We covered that in the split vote. Any interview I've ever given, I address that question in detail. I'm not worried about taking votes. There's no such thing. Many people we are meeting who are voting for us were already saying they weren't going to vote. Also, it's not my job to be less appealing than Biden-Harris. It is their job to convince you that they are your person. We hear this a lot. What is your Black agenda? Do you have one? And do you think today's candidate must have a Black agenda to win the Black vote? What I've always said is I believe the president, I would proudly be a president for all people. The majority of my life is spent in multicultural settings. My father is a civil rights activist. His focus is solely, for the most part, on the rights of Black Americans. That's his focus. We're from Charleston, South Carolina, where racism is still alive and well, where gentrification is the new pastime. It's the home now of the Dylan Roof tragedy there with Mother Emanuel Church. So we live in a very bittersweet location, #1 tourist destination, wedding destination, vacation destination in the world right now. But also #1 place where you see a place that used to be a slave port city now start to become predominantly white, and no Black people are benefiting from the profit that the city is seeing. So I do believe in this season, when you finally have universal buy-in that systemic injustices, systemic racism exists now and has always existed, I do believe you must have a president who, I hope, whether they were white or Black, would believe it is time now to turn back the clock on the systemic injustices by building in systemic success. What does that mean? It means that we've been general in our efforts to this point. Just to answer question, I do have plans specifically geared towards Black Americans. No, I do not believe that that is reverse discrimination or reverse racism. What I believe it is long overdue restitution and reinvestment in areas that we have long ignored. I talked to you earlier about what it means to be a Black woman running. And the history of Black women in this nation is that the Black woman has always invested in this nation and has never been recognized for it or repaid for her efforts. The same goes for chattel slavery. It's one of the greatest sins of our nation. And I think it's the root of the heart issue that we see now, not only in terms of racism between Black and white, but also in the way that we treat each other as human beings. I believe what we suffer from even more in this nation is a systemic heart issue. And that heart issue began when we valued the land here more than the indigenous natives who lived here, when we valued the cotton that we were growing more than the families and the hands that were picking it, when we valued the labor of the Black people that were slaves here more than we valued them as families and as units. And we broke these things up without losing any sleep. That's where our systemic heart issues started. One of the reasons that I believe so powerfully in the sanctity of life is because I believe it is something that has gone undervalued in our nation for a long time, not just talking about abortion. We'll get there. I know you want to get there as well, but I'm talking about in all the ways that we have devalued human life. I do believe that Black lives have paid a heavy price in our nation. And I do believe it is now time to look at what do we do to rectify that situation. If you go to operationrestoration2020.com, you'll find there programs and platforms specifically geared towards Black Americans. Let me tell you one of the generalizations we've made over time and why we have to rectify that. In our earlier efforts to rectify racism and discrimination, let's say in the workplace, we started doing things like affirmative action. By the way, for my friends who are not Black, no Black person, I'm gonna go on a limb and speak for all Black people, even though we are not monolithic. No Black person wants to believe they got a job, they got into a school, they were invited into a boardroom because they are filling a quota. So do not believe that Black people sit around celebrating, rejoicing over things like affirmative action. Affirmative action was a necessary action to force people to allow us into rooms we should have been invited into. So understand that whenever you see a Black person in one of these rooms, we're not excited to be there because we might have gotten there because somebody had to check off a diversity quota, right? I believe that the new diversity initiatives in this season must be us respecting and understanding who we are as a people, honoring me for my story, my background, my giftings, my intelligence, and it just so happens to come to you beautifully packaged in this shade of chocolate. You hear what I'm saying right now? So people want to be respected for who they are, for what they have up here, for what they have here. That's how we want to be taken. But because of the history of racism and discrimination in our nation, we've had to put in safeguards that have had to force institutions to allow us in. And then we get there and people realize how valuable we are, right? Women understand that. Generalization. One of the generalizations we've had to make is we say, we're going to give more funding for minority-owned businesses. That sounds good. It sounds like it covers the bases. The problem is what the statistics have shown us is that whenever we open the door for minority-owned, the people who actually benefit the most are Caucasian women. So Caucasian women routinely win the large majority of scholarships, grants, business funding that are for minority-owned because they fit the minority description, because they are minority in comparison to the male majority. The problem is African Americans still are left out of that. So I do propose that there is funding set aside not only for African American or minority owned businesses, but African American. Why do I specifically focus there? Because we have legitimate economic proof that when you invest in African American businesses, which right now are losing about $13 trillion because of systemic racism by itself. Do you hear that figure? When you reinvest in those businesses specifically, when you reinvest in Black communities, which not because they're Black, but because they are tax-paying people who live in those communities, and our taxes are supposed to go back to those communities, right? So when you do what is supposed to be done, by the way, this isn't even the bonus stuff that should be done. This is the stuff that's supposed to be done. When you invest in those businesses in that area, what happens is the GDP, the gross domestic product, increases by 2 to 4%. Everybody wins, right? So it's not reverse discrimination. What we're trying to do now is level the playing field, and we have to go back in time, right? And build in some ground that was, let's say, below sea level. So what you're doing is putting in ground and get people up to ground level. The president can't promise you the outcome. I can't make you win. I can call America great all I want. I'm not Oprah. I don't get to say, and you get $1 million and you get a car and I don't get to do that. But what the president must do is make sure that your access to opportunity is not blocked. You're going to have to do the work. You're going to have to do the work, right? We pride ourselves on hard work. And I want it to get out of that vocabulary of thinking that people who don't have are lazy. Shame on you, those of you who comment on my comments and see me as a Black person and say that I'm only speaking to a bunch of lazy you-know-whats. Shame on you. That's a systemic heart issue. We have to begin to understand that we don't all have the same access. And I believe leadership's job is to make sure that access is not blocked. All right, let me see a couple more of these here, and then I'll go to some of yours online. Those of you who are tuning in, I literally am going off of 100 questions here. I'm going to come back as many nights as possible and continue to do this. Oh, I hate this question. If you weren't on the ticket, who would you vote for and why? So if I weren't on the ticket, this would be an extraordinarily difficult year for me. I would be right now scouring the third-party options. I'd be looking at Jo Jorgensen, who is a third-party candidate. She's a libertarian. I'm not a libertarian. I take issue with her saying that America should be a great big Switzerland. I think that our role in the world is very important, and we can't afford to step back and say hands off. I think there'd be a lot more atrocities in the world if we did that. So that part of her policy bothers me. I also have a problem with part of her policy that talks about victimless crimes. I do believe she wants to make all illegal drugs legal. I don't think that's a victimless crime. If you see what drugs do to families, there's victims there. The main victim is the person addicted to the drug, but the family is also a victim. And so I do believe these things still need to be regulated. So she would give me pause too, but I feel much more confident about her character and about her decision making and her apolitical mode of operation. That might be someone I'd be considering very seriously. I do not believe that the current president has the character required to move us into the season that's ahead. I do believe he would behave more as an instigator in chief. I'm concerned that Joe Biden is not powerful enough on these issues of race and on these issues of economic equality. I do feel he's still very much of the old corporate guard. I don't demonize corporations, but I do believe it's a season to hold them accountable. And I know the CEOs who want to prioritize their people, and that's who we should be working with. I know the companies who are ready to engage in mutually beneficial transactions now, and that's who we should be partnering with. I know the companies who want to be a part of the recovery of our nation, and that's where the focus should be. So I get concerned about lobbyists and corporate interest from both the left and the right. So it would be very difficult for me. I'd be biting my nails down to the last minute. That's why I'm running. So I don't have to lose sleep, right, on who I vote for in this season. All right, one more before I go here. My campaign is very religious based. God is heavy in my words. How do you become relatable to people like me who aren't religious, or people who don't practice the religion that you practice? How will you uphold a constitution that separates church and state and holds religion as a protected class. Okay, remember I promised you before we end, I'll go to 8:15. I want you to be the most informed nation. Separation of church and state is not a part of our Constitution. It's not. You do your research on that. Thomas Jefferson wrote a letter, and in that letter, he talked about the wall of separation between church and state. It's not actually in the Constitution. And so he, when he was writing that, his concern at the time, because we were a very heavily Christian nation, was that the different Christian I am, for those of you watching, restarting on Instagram. Sorry, I forgot you were watching on Facebook. Instagram cuts you off after an hour. And so let me restart there, and then I'll continue with my question here. All right, let's go live again. Here we are. Okay, sorry about that, Instagram. I forgot they cut us off after an hour. Here we are back on Facebook. So separation of church and state was actually meant to make sure that no one, let's say, denomination dominated in our political sphere. The way we have reinterpreted it to mean today is what people think of as separation of church and state, which is that church and state shouldn't have anything to do with each other. I have no intention of dissolving the line of separation between church and state. But either we are a country of religious freedom or we're not. And we are a country of religious freedom, which means that I am free to be an openly practicing person of faith. I am free to express that. I don't have to apologize for it. Why am I open about it? In politics, supposed to be the kiss of death. I'm open about it because I believe in transparency, and I don't want you to have to wonder where I stand. I don't want you to have to go digging and you find out she's a minister. She wrote a book on prayer. Maybe she's the same Christian as the president. Maybe she's the same Christian as those evangelicals, right? So whatever negative stereotypes you may now have about Christianity, I want you to be able to look at me and make a direct comparison and contrast. One of the reasons that I'm running openly with my faith out front is because I feel like it has been hijacked by my friends, or maybe not my friends on the right. I also am running openly with my values because I don't always see them represented on the left. And so I felt there must be a place where people like me who felt politically homeless could come. And so where does my faith stand in my leadership? It does not mean that I'm trying to make everybody a Christian. It does not mean that I'm always going to be preaching at you. If you want me to preach, then ask me, and at your church, that's what I'll do. But as leader of the nation, my job is not to proselytize you. My job is to serve you. And I believe as a follower of Christ that one of the first models we have from Christ is servant leadership. So that's how it informs. My faith informs how I see you and how I treat you, especially when we don't agree. A new pastor friend of mine says that honor is best used in places of disagreement. And so I proudly honor, love, protect, and serve people, regardless of whether or not they believe like I do. And I would hope that the way that I live and the way that I treat people is a way that is not only worthy of modeling, but even those who don't believe in a God at all will see something in me that they can believe in and trust in terms of service. So I run openly with my faith out front, not because I'm trying to make everybody believe like me, but because I want to be open about what I do believe. Okay, I'm sorry, those of you who came off the last broadcast, all your questions are back over there. I'm going to try to pull some of those up as well. I'll end with the controversial one. Where do you stand on abortion? See, I don't skirt the hard stuff. Where do you stand on abortion? If you go to operationrestoration2020.com, you'll see our stance, what I call reproductive possibility. It's not a fancy word for abortion. Someone accused me of trying to find a euphemism for that word. I call a thing what it is. Abortion is abortion. So I don't have to find a fancy word for that. The reason I call our platform Reproductive Possibility is because I would love to see the focus now shifted on helping those who would actually like to reproduce, be able to reproduce powerfully. Abortion has a lot of advocates. We don't hear a lot of discussion about making sure that more women aren't dying in birthing rooms, about making sure that single mothers have access to the care they need for the children that we are demanding they keep to term. I believe that to be pro-human, which is what I call what I am, I don't use monikers like pro-life and pro-choice because they have become such rhetoric that they have lost all meaning, and they have even become hypocritical in their usage. So I use the term pro-human, which means that I care about life from the womb all the way to the tomb. If you watch any interview of mine, you've heard me say, don't come to me talking about the life of the baby in the womb if you don't also want to talk about people who are dying at the borders of our country, if you don't also want to talk about people who are dying in instances of police brutality, if you don't also want to talk about people being snatched off of assistance in the middle of COVID-19. All of that is life for me. Am I against abortion? I do believe that abortion is wrong. I can't say that any more plainly. I do believe that abortion is wrong. I believe we have blood on our hands as a nation because of it. I feel like it is a stain on the soul of our nation. Why? It's not about being wanting to have the moral high ground or wanting to judge women. Think about the natural resource that is human life. My concern is that we have lost world leaders due to abortion, that we have lost solutions to some of the world's greatest problems, that there are things that we may have been able to solve by now if we hadn't aborted the solution. That's why I'm passionate about it. I will not apologize for that. But I do not believe that we should be demonizing women who have had abortion, women who are considering abortion. If we're serious, and I believe pro-choice and pro-life can agree, that the best case scenario at the end of the day is to see the numbers of abortion drop, to see women serve powerfully. I do not believe that I have to control a woman's rights to her own body to see the abortion numbers decrease. I do believe that I should look for ways to serve her more powerfully so that she might choose life and choose it more abundantly. That means that I care how much she's getting paid. I want her to have pay equity so that if she does end up with an unintended pregnancy and decides to carry it to term, she can afford to pay for that life. I want to make sure that she's not choosing abortion out of victimization, that people who are engaged in sexual assault, that those people aren't getting off with a tap on the wrist, and then we're expecting women who are raped to carry a baby to term. If a woman does that, she is a hero of all heroes, and if so, she should be supported. We should be talking now about stricter consequences on people who are rightfully convicted of sexual assault. Why aren't rapists having their wages garnished? Why are they having to pay child support from prison? Like, let's get serious about it. If you want to demand that of a woman, then we need to talk about what we're also demanding of the accused, especially of the person who's been prosecuted and confirmed guilty. So I demand much broader conversations. If we are truly pro-life, then we care all the way through. If we're truly pro-choice, then we also want to help women choose life if that is what they choose. Someone said, what about the woman who just doesn't want to, she just doesn't want the baby? What about that? I can't do anything about that. I wish that we would never use abortion as a form of birth control. I think that that is a grave, I do believe that it is a wrong, it is a sin. I think it is something that we should not be engaged in. But I also don't believe that the way to deal with that issue is through legislation. So you won't hear me talking about overturning Roe v. Wade because I don't think it's going to work. I believe this is another heart issue. And I believe that the best work we can do is in helping people change hearts and minds. Not every heart and mind is going to be changed. But again, just like in healthcare, we have to ask ourselves, what is it that we really want? Do we want to be right? Do we want to be declared right? Or do we want to see numbers reduced? I want to see numbers reduced as quickly as possible. as legally as possible. And I believe we're in an age now where, especially because of the example of COVID-19, we're going to begin to value life like never before. And so I am a proponent of life. I do fight for the sanctity of life. I believe in it passionately. I don't apologize for it. I simply don't believe that the way to get there is by telling a woman what to do or legislating for a woman what to do with her body. That's my stance on that. Let me go through anything you have left. You don't know anyone's purpose in life. Listen, purpose is one of my soapboxes. And I believe that every single one of us here, excuse me if you don't believe like I do, I'm going to just speak unapologetically here. I believe every single one of us was literally put here on this earth for such a time as this, so that when we play God and eliminate life, we are inevitably eliminating the solution that came with that life. Not everybody's an Einstein. Not everybody's a Martin Luther King. That's not what I'm saying, but I believe there is high level value in every life. So for me, the thought of getting rid of a life means that we also lost value. We also lost an incredible resource. We also lost an incredible solution. In the very least, we lost an incredible family member. My daughter, I think about, is the joy bringer in our family. Can't imagine life without her. Does it make running for president very difficult, having 2 children and homeschooling them in the middle of COVID-19? You better believe it. But I know without a shadow of a doubt that my kids have purpose here that will extend beyond my life on this earth. And so I can't just believe that way about my children without believing that way about others and about you. So that's where that stance comes from, a real solid belief that we're all put here for a reason. And so that's one thing that shapes how I believe. But I think my stance on abortion also helps you understand how, even though I personally believe a certain way and will fight and will really fight to help others choose life more abundantly, I can't allow, let's say, my faith or the scripture that I follow to dictate the rules that are written. It's a very difficult thing. It creates cognitive dissonance in leadership. But that is what a leader does. A leader tries to make the best out of every situation, tries to serve as many people possible, and tries to aim for the closest thing to righteousness and justice as possible. All right, let me see. Anybody else here? Okay. All right, I'm going to wrap up here. What are 3 things I do to raise America's confidence once we're in office? Man, won't it just be nice again to have a president that you don't have to wonder whose side they're on? I would hope that just being an independent, for an independent to win, you better believe it's going to be a miraculous thing. But every president comes in with a mandate, and usually that mandate is given to them from their party. An independent president has the mandate of the people at large. That means that if you elect an independent to office, what you are saying is that you are completely done with politics as usual. You don't want anything that looks, talks, smells, walks like what you've seen before, and that's exciting to me. So I think simply winning as an independent, non-billionaire, no strings attached, no corporate sponsorships, to win in that way would be such a powerful thing for the American people to see. I think it'd be the surest sign that things are about to change for the better. And I think what's exciting so far to people is that they are seeing a heart for service, and to begin right away by serving people. I don't believe the first 100 days should be about building the president's legacy. I believe the first 100 days should directly correlate to whatever is happening for the last quarter of the year, from the last quarter of the year. And it should be on what do Americans need right now that will serve them in the quickest, most powerful, most sustainable way. So you'll hear me talking about job creation, and you'll hear me talking about ongoing emergency preparation. So I think that would immediately bring confidence. I think also to have someone who is confident and comfortable speaking about race. I actually love speaking about race because I don't think it is divisive. I think when done right, it is one of the most powerful discussions we can have. We are one race. People always come at me with the all lives matter thing. Yeah, all lives are supposed to matter. And I think for once you can, not for once, we've had other presidents, but I think coming into this season, the nation needs to know that it has a president that doesn't just care about his or her base, but sees their base as being the entire nation. And I think that would be something that's going to help us all sleep a lot better at night. Speaking of sleeping, I'm actually going to go hang with my kiddos. I'm a proud wife and mother of 2, married to my high school sweetheart, who we're going to get him on camera one day in the near future soon so that you can hear from him as well. But I have an incredible husband who I've known since I've been 15 years old. We have grown together. We have incredible children, a son who is about to turn 13 and a daughter who is 7 going on 25. And I so have enjoyed, I would not wish COVID-19 in this era on my worst enemy, but it is ours. It is where we are. So because of it, we have used it powerfully as a family to reset and to spend time together. I encourage you not to waste this moment that was intended as darkness. I dare you to change it into a moment of light for your family and your relationships. We have had some incredible moments as a family that, dare I say, had we not been forced to slow down because of the shutdown that is COVID-19, we might have missed. So I believe this is our nation's arise and shine moment. I believe it is our moment in that way as individuals and as families. So take advantage of it. Thank you guys so much for joining in. I'll come back very often, do the same thing for about an hour, hour and a half. So keep your questions coming. I'll also be going live on Instagram and Facebook at different times of the day, and I'll answer many of these questions as we go. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Thanks, Laura. Thank you for spending the time with us and for being such an enthusiastic advocate. We really appreciate it. Okay? Love you guys. Have a great night.